1896. A vellum leaf surfaced, and its ink followed the lamplight. In March 1896, the carpenters at a Premonstratensian priory outside Kutna Hora lifted a choir stole and freed a wrapped board the size of a ledger. Linen, browned like old tea, was stitched around a single vellum leaf. On the linen, someone had written, in iron Gorgon sepia, "Non-aperias do not open." They opened anyway. The board carried the leaf as if it were an icon. A black initial, D-shaped like a hinge, filled half the page. Inside the letter, a tiny green figure crouched, feet tucked under, mouth slit in a patient smile. Its eyes were pinpricks punched through paint. The hand was confident, the ruling straight, the margins wide. A faint pricking showed along the outer edge where a frame once held gold. The vellum smelled of egg, smoke, and old sacristy drawers. The abbot ordered a chest, then hesitated and sent for a schoolmaster who could spell Latin without sermonizing it. He read the rubric that ran like a low red river under the initial Liber Magnus de Peccatis et Remediis, Pars Decima Secunda, the great book of sins and remedies, 12th part. Below, text in a square, obedient hand named illnesses and counsels, melancholy, fever, doubt. Between lines lay guide rules scored with a stylus. At dusk, the page behaved like any good relic, quiet, heavy, aromatic with vellum and egg. By lantern, the green figure darkened as if the flame taught it evening. A mason swore he smelled mastic and myrrh where there should have been dust. When the abbot tried to lift the leaf, it refused by a method no doctrine prepares you for. The margin warmed his fingers as if a living thing declined to be moved. They boxed it anyway, under a spare chasuble that had learned to cover emergencies. The schoolmaster wrote to Prague, cautious with adjectives. The postcart trundled off through sugar-beet fields. The horses neither quickened nor slowed. In the chapel, the emptied stall kept the shape of a book unseen. A mouse investigated the linen thread ends and decided this was not food. The university library received the package with a priest's signature and a carpenter's confidence. Dr. Antony Novotny, paleographer, held the leaf by its boards and sniffed like a physician over an old patient. Vellum, calf, first quality, 13th century. The inks, carbon and iron gall. The rubric, minium tempered with egg, greens from verdigris that had not faded as they should. Punctures in the pupils took leaf gold, but not the fashionable thickness of royal work. Whoever painted the small figure understood hands. A score mark across the margin suggested an earlier binding, brutal and tidy. He placed the fragment on a stand under a velvet hood and let the page forget light before he showed it the 19th century. Under a bleak illumination, faint pricking beside the text produced a second order that did not match the block, as if the page remembered a prior layout under the present one. He wetted a swab with distilled water and touched a fly speck. The speck darted sideways and was, embarrassingly, alive. A mite of parchment, an ecosystem in a single sheet. Novotny apologized aloud and returned to his lens. He read, "Remedies advised restraint and rosemary." The Latin walked with the square shoes of a scribe who believed in roads. Between paragraphs, a faint annotation rose in the heat of the lamp, ink waking like a sleeper. Scripta non dormit. The scribe does not sleep. Novotny, sensible, blamed a palimpsest and wrote the gush down to capillary nonsense. At midnight, he returned. The lamp chimed as oil cooled. The annotation had migrated 3 lines, now annotating itself. Vigilet in tenebris. He moved the lamp. The note moved after the shadow, politely, the way a cat keeps a doorway under watch. Static, he said, to nothing in particular. And to the leaf he said, absurdly, Dobry вечер. The green figure's palms, cross-hatched like gloves, shone as if they had been licked. He shut the hood, then left the hood open. Photographs are faith with chemistry. Novotny fetched the new quarter-plate camera, warmed the glass under his vest, and composed with a ruler's manners. Corner pins, scale, north arrow, a tag in tidy hand, Depicatis, frag. He took one exposure with the hood off, one under red silk, and a third with the light low, and the lens stopped so hard the room forgot being a room. In the dark room, he poured the developer as if greeting a guest. Image rose like a confession. Under the initials black grew a second alphabet, ghostly and rigorous, taller than the visible text. A column of narrow capitals with long descenders, older than the square bookhand above it. The negative showed letters the page had declined to show the eye. Contractus, malum, praesens. Then a phrase that annoyed medievalists into sitting down. Silens pactum, the silent pact. On the second plate, the green figure in the D held its palms fractionally apart, a gap hair-thin where the paint had been continuous to the eye. On the third plate, a faint seam ran along the outer margin like heat seen over stone. He washed, fixed, and pegged the plates where they chimed faintly as drops cooled them. One drop paused at the devil's eye hole and grew round, then flattened as if something behind the film breathed out. Above the trays, the red lamp steadied itself. Novotny wrote on the backer, palimpsest confirmed. Photographic halation, possible creep of medium. He made a rubbing of the dry ruling with tissue. The tissue took more than lines. It recorded a thumbprint larger than his own, pressed diagonally across the lower margin and embedded at a depth no thumb could claim. The print had the whirls tidy men have, and a small scar that, if real, would have healed 5 or 6 centuries ago. He set the tissue aside and found it warm. The mite of parchment, new tenant, sat in the drying rack as if attending a lecture and absorbing modernity with poor grace. Institutions make their own weather when frightened. The library locked the fragment in case B, rare books, problematic, then added a drawer that required 2 keys, one secular, one ecclesiastical. The church agreed to lend its key each morning and take it away at vespers as if darkness were a jurisdiction. A police inspector, all mustache and form, signed a ledger as though arresting vellum. A week of observations produced what reports produce: respectable detail, unhelpful conclusions. The green figure's palms brightened near sunset irrespective of lamp. The rubric bled fractionally toward the outer margin whenever psalms were sung in the quadrant. The annotation moved with shadow and sometimes against it, pausing by words that named temptations as if to underline without ink. The iron gold text imposed small penalties on readers. Styes, paper cuts, a rash shaped like a capital G. Novotny's spectacles fogged when he leaned too close. and on one lens a ring of condensation formed where no breath had touched. Files multiplied. The inspector asked whether deviltry traveled by post. The church said no and kept a boy with a bucket of sand in the corridor anyway. Requests to see the piece multiplied under the wire of rumor. Spiritualists, learned Germans, a novelist with good boots. The librarian in charge of gloves found that wool, not cotton, kept the leaf calmest. Silk offended it and made the rubric brighten insolently. One afternoon, the drawer refused both keys. It opened to a string knowable by sailors, but tied with a variation nobody could name. 2 loops, a turn that went through itself, and a tuck that never taught slack. The inspector brought in a locksmith. The locksmith brought in a camera. The photograph of the knot made a clear picture of a thing that should not have held and did, dangerous as a child's puzzle. Inside, the leaf lay ordinary, except for a faint warmth not accounted for by lamp or hands. The boy with the sand did not come back the next day. Newsprint sharpened its teeth. In May, a satirical sheet printed a caricature, an enormous book held by a tiny clerk, with the caption, "University announces pact with relevance." The respectable papers settled for history. The Codex Gigas in Stockholm, a Bohemian origin, a legend of a monk who bargained with haste. Letters arrived offering cures and matches. A cabinet maker with ash boards, devil-proof. A chemist with a fixative for wandering inks. A medium who would introduce the page to its better angels. Parish ladies sent lavender. A student sent a scrap of his own thesis for the leaf to edit if it felt so inclined. The library permitted a demonstration for the sake of embarrassment. 2 professors, a canon, a photographer, and a journalist with hair like a brush sat around the case while a phonograph recorded the nothing that would occur. The medium asked for darkness. The librarian left 2 lamps on by temperament. Minutes arranged themselves. The phonograph gathered room tone and the click of a plate. Then, as if a hand had found the diaphragm with a glove, a low hum began, vowelless, steady, almost the frequency of a man thinking. The green figure's palms gleamed like polished malachite. The rubric crawled a letter width toward the edge and stopped as if scolded. The journalist's pencil broke itself. He borrowed a metal pen and wrote, "Leger minolis." "Do not read me," without meaning to, then crossed the line until the paper grazed through. The photographer tripped a magnesium flash. The plate later showed the room, the men, and the leaf. On the glass above the D, however, fingerprints appeared that matched no one present, arranged in a pair as if pressed from inside. The canon coughed, which was his manner of swearing. The medium fainted with dignity and recovered with tea. That night the caricature ran again, now with tiny horns on the clerk. The clerk bought 2 copies and filed them under ephemera, which is Latin for tomorrow's proof. After demonstrations come thefts or fires, and Prague in heat invites both. The night porter smelled pennies and varnish and went to the rare books corridor with a pail. No flame, only a bloom of warmth at the joints of Case B and a line of ash along the baseboard, like a rule drawn with charcoal and then blown upon. He logged it, hour, smell, witness of none, and sat back down, where he dreamed a small figure standing on the blotter and smoothing its palms over the grain as if rehearsing a climb. At dawn, the drawer stood open, though keys remained where the day expected them. The fragment lay half out, as if it had attempted and abandoned travel. Across its lower margin, the embedded thumbprint, once diagonal, now lay upright and clear. Novotny, courteous to facts even when rude, lifted the page by its boards. The vellum's edge bore a singe the width of a hair. More troubling, in the palimpsest layer, the word contractus had acquired a suffix and a certainty. Contractus perfectus. Under it, as if translating itself, a later hand had written in paler ink, "Pact made good." He checked his notes and his plates like a priest checking linens for forgery. The inscription had not been there yesterday in any spectrum or shadow. The mite of parchment lay legs up in the soap dish, overcome by progress. The porter resigned before lunch, saying the building had learned to exhale. That evening, the abbot from Kutna Hora arrived with a small reliquary and a larger argument. "It belongs to stone," he said, "not to plates." The inspector shrugged in the language of men who do not own anything. The library made a receipt, which is a ritual that rarely fails, and handed back the boards and their passenger. The cart rattled out of the gate, iron on iron, and the griffins over the door learned to watch it go. Rain began, soft as an apology the Vltava would not deliver. The fragment keeps a life in two places now. At the priory, it rests in a new oak box that forgets to be new, brought into the church on nights when thunder thinks of education. A glass pane sits high above it, humble as a window. Parishioners pretend indifference. In Prague, the library keeps the plates, the rubbings, the notebook, and the knot photograph that still ties itself in the mind's hand. Scholars travel, look, return, and produce articles that end reasonably. Verdigris, stability, halation, latent images, the stubborn romance of palimpsests. Still, certain habits repeat. Once a year, Walpurgis, when the country decides bonfires are a good idea, the rubric creeps a syllable toward the outer margin, and the green figure's palms open a measurable hair. A child in the nave will hear humming and sing the one-note children make when they do not know they are singing. The Latin annotation wakes and glances. Vigilat, dormit, lege, noli. In Prague, a clerk who files requests finds one slip each spring written in reversed capitals, asking for the fragment by a call number that exists only in his dream. The plates fade at their edges and remain treacherously crisp where the undertext names packed. The tissue rubbing still holds warmth on some afternoons with no cause the custodian will endorse aloud. A small scar in the thumbprint prints itself on new paper when the season is damp. Stand near the case, oak there, glass here, and the air will practice a polite chill like a museum's breath. You will see your face and, if you stand close enough, a suggestion in the reflection of hands held up as if against glass. No voices, only page sound, the long dry whisper of parchment settling, the faint tick of a cooling lamp, and, under it, the vowelless hum the phonograph taught you to expect. The fragment says nothing that can be cited. It continues to edit where to place its silence.